You're listening to the Mark Bradford Alchemy for Life podcast.
So what lens do you have? Well, hey there. Welcome back. Are you feeling blue? Wait, that's a different podcast. I mean, you can see blue, right? This podcast is not about people who have color blindness physically or neurologically for the blue spectrum. It's something else entirely. Have you ever heard that the ancient peoples couldn't see blue? Well, yeah, it's been believed for quite some time that for some reason we think they couldn't see blue, but it wasn't until somebody that was a philologist, but it wasn't until somebody who's a philologist, which is someone who studies words, decided to actually kind of look into it. And he analyzed a lot of ancient languages. And he couldn't find blue. He couldn't find a mention of the word blue, which is kind of odd, right? Especially if you live near a lake or you look up at the sky every now and then. And even where I live, once in a while it's blue. Upon learning this, it made me remember when I was younger. I used to have an argument with my friend. And I used to tell him, I used to say, hey, I see green, but when you look at green, do you see the same color as I see? What if you see blue and call it green? And I'm calling blue green and vice versa. And he said, no. That was the end of that conversation. That's kind of what we're talking about here. So you can imagine that it was quite mind-blowing for someone to dig deeply into languages, someone who does that basically for a living, only to not find the word blue. But then again, other than the sky and maybe water, depending on the time of day you're looking at it, you really don't see that much blue in nature at all. In fact, you mostly see violets and things like that. Obviously, there was a lot of back and forth between whether the people could actually see blue or not, or they weren't describing it for some reason, that the word just didn't pop up in the language for some reason. And there was a lot of confusion until a psychologist did some digging. And here's what they found. When they didn't have a word for it, they couldn't really recognize it. When they did have a word for it, it made recognition a lot easier. In fact, here's some anomalies to help you understand that. When have you ever said light red? I mean, if you're a native English speaker at least, you probably don't often say light red. Oh, look how pretty that light red is, Pretty in light red. No, we say pink. We take a shade of red, a lighter shade of red, and that's all pink is. And then we say it's pink. But we take a lighter shade of blue and we say it's light blue. Because we differentiate it, because we have a word for it, it's easier for our brains to recognize. In fact, they even went so far as to interview a tribe from Namibia, which I love that word, by the way. And in their language, there's no word for blue, and they don't really have a distinction between green and blue. So they showed them a whole bunch of squares, a whole bunch of shades of green, and they had one blue square in there. And they had a lot of difficulty recognizing which one was the blue square, even though to us, in a second, we could look at it and go, oh, there's the blue one, it's right there. It's jumping out at us because it's not green. However, these people also had a number of words for green. So if you showed them a number of squares that were only slightly different, they could point out the green that was only slightly different than the other greens. While we would have more difficulty, we can still do it, but we have more difficulty. Again, because they have words for it, it's easier for their brain to recognize. Do you see where I'm going yet? It's okay. We're still going. So also, native Russian speakers, and if you're a native Russian speaker, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but this was a study that was in 2007. Native Russian speakers are kind of like us in the way that they have separate words for blue and light blue, in the same way that we have separate words for red and light red. And because of that, they're able to discriminate between the shades much faster than we are, in the same way that we can discriminate between a pink and a red very quickly. And again, it's the language that's allowing us to do that. Or rather, it's the language that's preventing the ancients from doing that. I mean, there's literally passages that say that the sky was blood red, or that the sea was a dark red, because they only had red to draw from. It was sort of a shade of red to them. And it's hard to wrap your mind around it, because you want to plug their eyes into your eyes and go, wait, aren't you seeing blue? It really boggles the mind a little bit until you realize just how much we filter what we experience in life. We filter it through experiences. We filter it through language. I'm not a multiple language speaker, but I know a lot of multiple language speakers. And a lot of times I will have conversations, and we'll have an interesting conversation about, well, there really isn't an exact word for that, so I have to use 3 or 4 words to do that. And the funny thing is, I encounter that all the time when I'm thinking about something. If I'm intensely thinking about something and I can't really quite think of the word that describes it, I will always be able to come up with 2 words that if you mush them together, it would describe what I'm thinking of. And so that's the only clue I have to how perhaps their minds work as well. So back to the colors. Until the word for it surfaces, they don't really see it, apparently, right? Or they don't see it in the same way that we do. They don't make a distinct separation of the thing that they're seeing, right? So again, you could say in very broad terms, if they don't have a word for it, it kind of doesn't exist, right? Because it's not like it's invisible, but it's assumed to be part of the other reality that they're seeing, right? And that brings us to our final destination here. In your life right now, in modern times, and I use quotes around that because it's always changing, it's easy to become arrogant about what we can and can't do. It's easy to become arrogant about our accomplishments and as a society and what we understand in science and other things, right? And we bandy that stuff about. Oh, we're modern people. We're not savages, da-da-da-da-da. But things like that were said in the 30s, in 1930, almost 100 years ago, right? There, I could quote you thing after thing after thing about how man isn't designed to go faster than 20 miles an hour, and you know, flight is impossible. And like when we thought about flight, we would see ships in the sky because those were the vehicles we had. Well, let's put them in the sky, right? So we always talk in terms of what our reality is. And when you're going to talk in terms of what your reality is, you better damn well have words to describe it, or you're just going to be grounded. So in that same way, it kind of makes you think, doesn't it? Is there something in your life that you don't have a word for? And because you don't have a word for it, you can't see it. Yeah, that's pretty creepy, isn't it? If you take that down to a slightly lesser extent, different groups, different circles, everybody has their own linguistics, right? I mean, even in music, right? Different racial divides of people, different ethnicities develop sort of some colloquial rules and words about things. You know, to me, for example, to me, if I eat Mexican food, which I think is great, it all looks the same to me. It's a thing rolled up with some stuff in it and with something poured on it, and it's like the same 3 ingredients. I know that's offensive because it's not, right? But because I don't know one thing from another, it all looks like either a burrito or a taco to me. So because of my limited vocabulary for that stuff, I'm not quite seeing and tasting the difference, let's say. And maybe I am, and maybe I'm exaggerating just to be silly here. But it kind of makes you understand a little bit more on how one social circle can see something that's so apparent that one social circle doesn't, because they have a word for it. And I'm not saying that there isn't a dark side to that, where you create a word for something and then you kind of try to will it into existence, right? I'm not saying that. And I do think that's that's a dark path to go down. But I do want you to consider in these last seconds, if there's something in your life that maybe you're not seeing because you don't have a word for it. And I know that's tremendously open, right? And maybe we'll come back and revisit this, because I think this is just such a fascinating concept. And even after 10 minutes, you probably still don't believe it, but go ahead and look it up. I'll add some links in the article. And have an awesome day. Hey there, thanks for listening. You know I always enjoy your feedback. The prequel to The Sword and the Sunflower duet, called Upside Down, is now available. The Sword and the Sunflower is available as Kindle, paperback, and audiobook, with the other two, Amira and Upside Down, being available as Kindle and paperback. Well, actually, all three books are now available in hardcover.